I had somebody who I used to work with, and his name was Bill. Good old Bill. The man was like in his 70s, and he had retired. Actually, I think he was 80. Tried to retire 5 different times, and he couldn't do it. So he just continued to work part-time on different things because he enjoyed having something to do and get out of the house. And that quickly taught me the lesson of you need to have a plan for retirement.
Yeah, and I think if you get nothing else out of this episode is to realize you need somebody to call you on your BS and like, will you actually retired? What do you need for money? Like we have all these stories, but you really need to think about what you're going to do with it.
Welcome to the Childfree Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bri and Dr. J, certified financial planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast.
To retire or not to retire? That's the question. And it's one of those things that people don't often question. They're like, when can I retire? But that's a different question of should you retire? And I think the hard part is there's this assumption that you want to retire no matter what, which, okay, let's be real. Some of us want to stop working. That's fine. But when do you want to retire to? And how do I know if I'm ready? And how do I know if I'm going to like it? That's what we're going to dig into on today's episode. So, Bri, are you going to retire in the end, or are you going to cut back, fire? What are you doing?
My plan is to retire because I have many other things that I want to do, and I don't want to be worrying about having to make any money doing them. I just want to have that option. I like having options. That's one thing about me. So I will give myself the option to completely retire. And if I keep working and make money after, cool. But I don't want it to be something I have to do.
So that's the old school FU money. So you got enough money that you can quit your job, but you don't necessarily have to.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So think about your clients. How many of them say like, I want to retire, never work again, and just like sit on the beach or something?
Many of them say that they want, in fact, I was in a meeting this morning and they said, we want to retire and take a couple years and do nothing. And then maybe we'll do something, but we don't really know if we want to do anything after that. So it really varies. There are some people who say, I don't think I can retire fully. But I think, at least from what I've seen, especially recently, the biggest thing is take a couple years to just do whatever and then consider doing something again and not necessarily starting a different position right away.
The technical term for that, by the way, is a phased retirement. Like I'm going to do a phase of where I'm not working, then I'm going to work, then I'm not work. But I think what I find is, I don't know, 5%, 10% of the people that we talk to actually really want to just stop and just do nothing. Everybody else is like, I want to cut back. I want to travel. I want to do something else. I was having a discussion today with somebody and that they're in the law field. And then they're like, yeah, but I want to do something I enjoy. Like, okay, cool. Like, or others, I'm doing this job, pays me a lot of money, but I want to do something fun. My argument is always, well, why don't we do that now? But there's this assumption that you're going to retire. If you're going to come to me and say, hey, I want to know when I can retire, my first question is retire to what? And like, what does that look like? So people know what they want to retire from, but they don't necessarily know what they want to retire to. And right now in my life, I'm kind of more on the fire path. Like, let's bust my butt and then I'll retire and do something. But the reality check is I know I'm not going to stop doing everything, but I want to get on a boat and travel the world. And like, if I decide for a month that I'm just going to wander in the boat, great. And then if I decide I'm going to take a month and write a book, I can do that too. Like, and yes, I actually wrote a book in a month once, but like, you can do those things and you get options. When people say fire, financial retire early, one of the things one of my colleagues, Cody Garrett, calls it financial independence, recreational employment. I'm like, ooh, I kind of like that. Does that hit you, Bri?
Yeah, I like it because it gives you that option and you can do what you want when you want because you want to do it, not because you have to do it. Really like the recreational employment. It's just having something to go do because you enjoy having something to do.
Well, yeah, and there's a big difference between I want to work and I've got to work at Walmart as a greeter. Like Walmart, actually now they don't even have the greeters now. I mean, they used to before COVID. But like, there's a gentleman that worked at this Walmart down the road. He's got to be 80 years old, really nice, welcome to Walmart, but you could tell he's freaking miserable. Like he's working there because he's got to pay the bills. Versus, I just had a meeting the other day with some folks, and they're retired, but they work on boards and they're volunteering and doing things. They work, but only when they want to and on what they want to. And I think that's a challenge. So we're going to take this episode and say, all right, you've gone through the debate. You've decided you're going to retire and not work at all. And the reason we have to make that assumption is because if you're going to work, that changes your finances. You're going to have money coming in, there's a term barista fire. Like I'm going to fire, financial manager, retire early, but I'm going to be a barista and make enough money to get benefits and talk to people. By the way, that doesn't sound like a fun job to me, but like that's not retirement.
Not for you. But yeah, it's not retirement. It's not retirement.
Would you really want to be a barista?
A barista? No, but I kind of just, I don't know. I want to do something as far as that I could talk to people, but I think I wouldn't make it something where I would need to be financially motivated. For me, it would probably be just like a volunteer thing where I can go talk to people. But just knowing you and knowing that, seeing you as a barista, I could never. You talking to people behind a counter,
making pointless small talk all day long. That's my third circle of hell, I think. Okay, cool. So let's assume you're going to retire, stop working, follow the standard thing. The standard math is they call it a FIRE number, a financial independence number. You need 25 times your current expenses in net worth in order to retire. That's based on the 4% safe withdrawal rate. When Bri and I first started, she made this chart next to her computer because it's a rough math that's fast and if you're spending $40,000 a year on your expenses, multiply that times 25. That's what you need. Well, it's $1 million. That's rough math, but it also assumes you want to pass some money to the next generation. So, Bri, how do you use this 4% rule in practice?
I usually use it as yep, that's good. You're fine. We don't need to be stressed about a lot of things. It's not something that I necessarily look at and call it gospel, though. I just say, okay, this is good if you want to pass money on. And as a reminder, hey, you said you didn't want to pass money on. We don't really need to worry about that. But you've even hit that number, so you're fine to retire yesterday at this point.
And this is where people start fighting us on yeah, but my house is in there and that doesn't count. And this is in this retirement account, that doesn't count. And I'm like, okay, here's your net worth. Your net worth is everything you own minus everything you owe. That's it. They're like, but this doesn't count because that money is set aside. I'm like, no, you're not. You get stuck in this, but because the people doing mental accounting, this money goes for that. I go, it probably does. But your total net worth is still whatever that is.
People often do forget about that house in there. I did things recently. I do it all the time. But when you add that property value in there and people discount that, I had somebody put on a form, their net worth was $1 million less than it actually is because you add that property in there. And you need to think about, are you going to stay there forever? Many times people aren't. They're going to sell it and they want to move. So having that conversation and making sure you don't leave that out is super important.
Yeah. And back of the napkin math tells you are you doing well or not? Now that 4% rule does not take into account Social Security, does not take into account the traveling the world you want to do. It doesn't take into account what's your plan for your parents. It doesn't take into account a lot of things. But where it's based on is studies looking at, okay, if I'm going to retire and I'm going to live 30 years, what number can I take out each year and have a low likelihood of running out of money? And you'll see math that they'll say, well, the 4% is not right. And somebody will say 3.5 and somebody will say 5. And none of them are right. It's all just a guess that gets you in the right direction. And I think what you can do is if you take your total net worth and you've got 25 times your expenses, you have options. You can retire then. And then people say, well, but I'm not old enough to retire. Well, it turns out your age is actually the least important thing about your retirement. Like you hit 65 does not mean you can retire. And if you're 55 doesn't mean you can't retire. You seen that, Bri?
Yeah, absolutely. They'll often say, well, I'm not old enough to retire. I can't get money out. You can get money out of your accounts earlier. There are different ways to do it. It's not just the 59 and a half. There are multiple ways. And so those things are often forgotten about. And I think people tether themselves to a number.
Yeah. And they say, I have to work until, this age. And I'm like, why? Well, because I read this calculator online and I'm like, okay, stop. Like, so in Childfree, yeah, like, or if you ever read the charts, like by age 40, you have to have this. Oh, those just are really annoying me because none of those match our clients. But people like quote them like they're gospel. So if you have 4%, you're ready to go. Now, we're going to come back to, well, if you want to die with zero, you actually have to spend more than that. And I had somebody ask me, like, okay, so for child-free people, is it 5%? Is it 6%? I'm like, no, none of those are real numbers that you should do planning on. Like, those are all like literally back of the napkin math, like, rough. Are you directionally in the right location? When we do this plan, we'll actually build a die with zero safety net. So a plan for long-term care, put our Social Security till 70, a little cash cushion, and then we'll optimize for how much you spend. And we'll adjust it by inflation every year. And we'll put in things like your travel, other things, and do a plan. But that plan is a one-shot thing. It doesn't tell you everything that's going on. And when people get to like, well, what math can I use? Unfortunately, at some point, you need to get into some fancy financial planning software and working with an advisor to really look at the numbers. I mean, does that make sense, Bri?
Yeah, because it depends on what you have in your investments. There are different funds that have different rates of return. And what does that look like? Sometimes people can have a ton of bonds or they can have a lot more stocks. Like, you can't use a general number when it comes down to the nitty gritty and only ever go by that. You need to look at what you have, what your returns have been, what that looks like, not what the general is, because everything that we use, on average, it's 7 to 10% a year for the market, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're in that range. It could be higher, it could be lower. It just varies. And so you need to sit down and go through that and talk about that with somebody who can help you with it.
And then you get into this questions like, what about Social Security? Well, if you're Gen X or younger, chances are your Social Security is going to be, cut back somewhere. Like I'm Gen X. I kind of discounted by 25%. I don't think I'm going to get nothing, but like you're going to get a portion of it. But it's not your retirement plan. Social Security was actually never meant to solely cover your retirement. The old school was kind of this three-legged stool, which was supposed to be Social Security, a pension, and your house. Well, nowadays, pensions are almost non-existent unless you're a government worker. And the house is a choice for a child-free person. And they're calling it now Gen X being the kind of testers of do 401ks work because it's a voluntary contribution. Did people save and how that work? I think the challenge is, people have these assumptions like, hey, I should be able to live off Social Security. Yeah, probably not going to be able to. Bri, how do you look at Social Security?
Personally, I just don't plan for it. I call it a nice cherry on top if it happens. I guess I'm a little bit pessimistic in that sense for the thought, and that's okay with me to be pessimistic in that way. It is such a small number, especially as you see different amounts from different people. I think if you are the Gen X or older, then you can plan for it a little bit more, but it really varies by age, and I don't see it being something that I even like to really consider in plans.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that assumption because, like, if you plan that Social Security is not going to be there and then it is, woohoo, I got extra money. Like, it didn't hurt you. if I'm planning on Social Security and then it doesn't happen, I might be out of luck. So then people kind of look at retirement like, well, what am I going to do for healthcare? Healthcare is going to be so expensive, I can't handle it. Okay. First of all, if you quit your job tomorrow, you'll go on to the ACA plan, most likely. And if your income drops to nothing, chances are you'll actually get a subsidy towards your insurance. But if you're going to pay for it out of pocket, kind of like the rough math is for a single person, it's going to be like $12,000, $13,000 a year. And for a couple, about 25. Now that's assuming you're going to have to pay for, all the out of pocket, the deductible, everything. That's $14,000, $15,000 if you want to go crazy for a soloist. That's not enough to stop you from retirement. It's kind of like an interesting kind of history note here. Healthcare was offered by employers as a way to trap people to stay. And that's what's happening. Like they've done research on like what happens if Medicare for all happens. And the answer is a whole bunch of people quit their job. And I'm like, if you're just working for healthcare, how about we just quit the job? Like we can fund it elsewhere. I mean, have you seen this, Bri?
Yeah, I see it all the time. And I had some conversations with some people about it last night. I think it's funny that we get so tied up in it. And I hate that is the way our society is built, as to keep you in a job for healthcare, because I don't think that is a great way to live. And I don't want people to stay in a job that they don't like just for the healthcare. But I do see it all the time. And, I look at the plans for different people and it's like, I don't know, looking at these numbers, it's not enough to convince me that you hate your job every day and hate waking up and going to work. Not enough to convince me to stay in that job.
Yeah, the amount of times people have told me I have to keep this job because of healthcare, I'm like, just quit, like please, like, and I'll actually go to their state website because you can actually do this. You can get an estimate of what it will cost and pull it up, and I'm like, okay, cool. So you're telling me for $15,000 you won't be miserable? And they're like, well, I didn't think it was that cheap. And I'm like, it's part of your plan. I think the bigger one on the Childfree folks on the retirement plan is, what's your plan for long-term care? We always encourage people to have a plan in place by about mid-40s, which is fine, but you do need to set that aside from your retirement funds. So I talked about net worth being everything. Cool. But if you're going to self-fund long-term care, if you're a couple, I say to put aside about $500,000. If you're single, I say to put about $500,000 aside. And that doesn't sound right, but what it is in a couple, often one person in the couple will take care of the other one for a period of time. So your total long-term care bill is less. If you're a single woman, your long-term care bill will be higher than just about anyone else on average. So you need to have a plan, whether it's long-term care insurance or money set aside, but that has to be part of your retirement plan. Then that money does not get counted in your retirement plan. And I think that's where people are like, well, but you just told me I counted all in the 4% rule. Yeah, for the 4% rule, like that's generic. And the 4% rule, by the way, does not talk about long-term care. It's taking your expenses now, multiplying by 25. When you look at actual retirement spending, there's something called the retirement smile. You'll spend a lot of money in your first couple of years out because you're doing the bucket list. Then you settle down expenses. And then you spend a lot of money in your last few years because of long-term care. Well, this is where people have to pause and say, am I ready for retirement? And do I have to work extra just for long-term care? What do you think, Bri?
Yeah, long-term care is such a big question, and it's not I'm not going to think about it is not an answer. It is, you need to do something. What that is up to you, what you choose. And there are multiple options, but it needs to be a consideration in your retirement planning.
Yep. You need to check the box somehow. All right. I don't care how you check it. The general rule we try to follow is, if you have about between $500,000 and $3 million in net worth, then you can buy insurance. If you have more than $3 million, you can self-insure. If you have less than half, you'll probably end up on Medicaid. Like, that's rough numbers, kind of like that 4% rule, rough numbers, but it gives you a ballpark, but you need a solution. And the other one you need a solution for in your retirement plan is, what's your plan for your parents? And that sounds weird, but like, look, if I put all my money aside and I have my expenses set, and then all of a sudden I got to pay for my parents' long-term care at $115,000 a year, I might be going back to work. And like, that's a nightmare. Like, or the other one is, okay, the parents are going to move in with me. Well, my expenses just doubled. How am I handling that and structuring it? And I think that's something people don't look at in their retirement plan.
Yeah, it's definitely a forgotten item. And having those conversations early and often and knowing what those plans look like is so important, because there could be a variety of things for a variety of parents. And remember that you have boundaries too. You don't have to just go by what they tell you and what they want. Nope, you are a grown adult. You have the option to choose whether they live with you, whether they don't live with you. And you can say to some parents, yeah, it's okay if you live with me. And you can, especially if you're in a couple, or even if you're single too. And then you can tell other parents that, no, you're not living with me, or I'm not helping you. It's up to you what you choose. And those boundaries don't need to be the same for every parent or person that might be in your life that they expect you to care for.
Yeah. And if you're getting the trend that the money and your age are kind of less important, they kind of are. They're the simple things. And then it's like, well, what is your plan for long-term care? What's your parents? What are they like? What do you want to do when you retire? What does that look like? Do you want to travel? Do you want, like, there's all these other factors. When we meet with people, we do these child-free wealth checkups. Often one of their top questions is, when can I retire? I'll ask them, do you want to retire? That's a whole debate. But let's say they do say they want to retire. We'll go through the math and then go, here are the 3 things you need to do to retire. And it's not always 3, but let's just use that as an example. And it's very rarely, okay, you need to like change your investments by this 0.2%. No. It's these checklist things. I need to make sure you have a plan for that. And people then ask, well, then how can I retire earlier? Well, you can either save more money or lower your expenses. That's it. Those are your 2 triggers. Be like, well, that's too simple. I'm like, no, that's pretty easy. So I'll give you an example. I did this for a client, and they wanted to travel and do a whole bunch of fun stuff. They were going to live in a random island in the South Pacific, and they were going to live in Tuvalu. What is Tuvalu? I have no freaking clue, but it's an island in the middle of the South Pacific. And we figured out the total cost for a living per year, including healthcare, including housing, was going to be about $25,000 a year. If your expenses are $25,000 a year, you can retire pretty early. If, on the other hand, your expenses, I've done for folks, it's a couple $100,000, you need a lot more money. And it's like, how do you find that balance? In the fire world, they'll talk about it as fat fire versus lean fire. Lean fire is like you're eating ramen noodles in retirement, and fat fire is you have your own private chef. I don't care which one of those you want, but that's all going to impact your time. And it's going to impact, when do you get to retire? It's going to impact how much money you have. And I think the challenge is there's just this assumption, well, I have to work to this age, I have to do this, I have to do that. You don't have to do any of that. Being child-free means you have a lot of choices. You don't have to retire. That's an option. You can retire early. You can go to a different job. It's somebody, I really, once I get through this, I really want to go back and get a master's in something else, and I want to do this other job. I'm like, cool, let's do that. That's not retirement, but let's just do that now. Like, I got to wait till I retire, because they were like, my mother did that, and when they retired, I'm like, that's nice for your mom. Like, that's her choice. And people get pictures of retirement from their family members, and I don't know about you, Bri, but like, they're not always the best examples.
I don't know that I'd follow. Well, I mean,
don't need to put you under the gun there, but
yeah. No, probably my grandparents' retirement is pretty nice. I talk to my grandma about it often, and if she enjoyed her retirement and all the years she spent with my grandpa, and they do a lot of the things that I enjoy too. But otherwise, I don't know that my retirement vision matches everybody else's, or even close to many of them in their retirement.
Well, this is where the question is, what do you want to retire to is more important than what you want to retire from. And by the way, let's be real. Your grandmother's retirement is not what yours is going to look like.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think the places
world.
they've traveled is kind of fun.
Yeah. So if you want to do,
cool.
if you want to do the travel thing, cool. But if you use your expenses now to calculate what you need for retirement and you're going to travel, that doesn't work. The hard part is you go down the Google hole. So you're just searching things like, when can I retire? What can I, and like the end result are these rules that just don't fit. You know, if you want to get a good shot at this, okay, cool. You grab a Childfree wealth checkup with us. We charge $250 for it. We'll get you a picture of where you're at. Now, by the way, that's a snapshot of today, what you need to do to get to these goals to get there. What I tend to find is when we make that plan with people, they're usually closer than they thought they were. You know, I did this with somebody and she's like, I want to retire. I think it was like 10 years or something like that. And I'm like, why don't you do it next year? She's like, I can't do that. I'm like, yeah, you can. And then once we tell them that, their brain explodes. Like, it's like, the car again. Like, what do I do? Like, I've actually gotten my goal. What do I do? Like, you know, and I think people just like, I don't know if they just find comfort by Googling things. Like, if you Google enough, you'll find somebody that gives you the answer you want. Like, you can find somebody that says you need more money and you can find somebody that says you need less. Which one's right? Which are you looking for? Do you want somebody to tell you you need more money or less?
Depends on the day. Honestly, depends on how I feel that day. I tend to be quite conservative.
If you're hating work, you know, you want it to be right now.
No, you know, my thing is whenever I come back from vacation, and I came back a couple days ago from vacation, and it's truly only the second vacation that I've taken this year that has been an actual vacation. We're recording this in December, but I don't think this comes out till spring. Most of the time I've been off this year has been for reasons that I would just rather not be off for. I'd rather be working. And I was like, man, I don't know that I even want to work today. So it was kind of a little bit of a struggle, but now I feel back in the groove. I'm like, okay, it's good.
So you want the lower number when you want to get out of work. I mean,
yeah, it just depends.
By the way, your emotions have nothing to do with your retirement number. Like, but that's what we do. I think what I'm getting more in the habit of with my clients is setting both a minimum number and a maximum number. You know, so I've talked about this before on the podcast. My number, our fire number is about 5 million and our maximum is about 10 million. And those numbers are based on getting on a boat and travel the world. Like, they're not cheap. All right. Could I retire now? Yeah, probably. Would I live the life I want to live? No. So that's part of that picture. And, you know, some people are listening. It's like, well, I'll never have $5 million. You know, he's crazy. Oh, okay. That'll work longer to get the boat I want. It's okay. Like, I have people that 100%, all they do is they work so they can travel. Every dollar they earn goes to traveling. Like, that works. I got somebody else who wanted to work full time so she can give more money away. That's fine too. Like, you can pick different purpose. I think what I find is once you hit your FI number or your retirement number or whatever, your relationship with work changes. You know, this is the old school FU money. Like, you can tell your job to go away. And interestingly enough, people tend to like their job better when they don't need it. They're like, I can tell this job to go away, so I'm not going to do this extra work. Or, you know, you're doing the performance review and they're like, and what's your goal for the next 5 years? And you're like, nothing. They're like, well, don't you want to move the ladder? No. So you're just going to stay where you're at? Yes. Like, and all of a sudden they're like, huh? You're giving me the wrong answers. I'm like, no, these are my answers. Like, I like what I do. I'm good with it. I'm going to stick here. And it like breaks people's brains again. But all of a sudden you're like, this job is not bad because I can put boundaries around it and I enjoy it. Versus when you're trying to just grind it out and you're like, I just hate the world. And I think the challenge for retirement, if you're going to go down that path, is you can grind hard, which means you save a lot of money, you work really hard. This is where you see on all the socials about the hustle culture and you're out there, blah, 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 blah. Cool. You can do that. You'll get to retire earlier. Do you sacrifice your life on the way by? And I'm okay if that works for you. I'm right now in a season where I'm hustling. I'm grinding. I've got businesses going on. I've got structures. Like we're rolling on new stuff. Yep. I'm 100% in that. But guess what? There's a limit to that. To me, I'm working for a certain period of time and then, yeah, I'm going to cut back. That works. Others, Bri's much better at that work-life balance than I am. Awesome.
No, I'm not. Not anymore.
Well, in comparison to me? Well, I mean.
I had to finally delete emails from my phone because I kept checking them on vacation. I was like, oh, God.
Yeah.
I'm becoming Jay.
I was driving back from a meeting yesterday, and I realized if you want to like push my buttons, if you want to get me to do something, tell me my clients need me or my staff needs me. I will like perk up. I will get everything done. I will bend over backwards. I will conquer whatever they got. I sacrifice myself every time to do that. Problem is, I'm that vested in what we do. And that's where it's like, oh, how do I find that balance? And I'm like, okay, well, what's most important? Most important to me is helping people. The dollar signs for retirement don't. Like, it's like people just assume retirement is all about numbers. It's not. What would happen if you just quit your job and found something that you enjoyed? Would you care about retirement then? I mean, these are the questions you need to get to, not what's my 4% rule. So, Bri, I know we're talking about this, and hopefully you're not quitting your job to go somewhere else. But like,
don't plan on it.
Are you with me on this kind of debate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it makes it easier to say, yeah, I don't have to be working, and life would be fine. That makes working easier. And I think if you enjoy what you do, it's obviously a lot easier. But true, you do need to know what you're going to go retire to and do afterwards, and have a plan so that way you're not just sitting around, because that can be kind of hard. And there are multiple people that I've talked to who I had somebody who I used to work with, and his name was Bill. Good old Bill. Man was like in his 70s, and he had retired. Actually, I think he was 80. Tried to retire 5 different times, and he couldn't do it. So he just continued to work part-time on different things because he enjoyed having something to do and get out of the house. And that quickly taught me the lesson of you need to have a plan for retirement.
Yeah. And I think if you get nothing else outside of this episode is to realize you need somebody to call you on your BS and like, will you actually retired? What do you need for money? Like we have all these stories, but you really need to think about what you're going to do with it. And I'll give you one last example. I was in a meeting yesterday and talking with this gentleman. He worked for 47 years in this one office down the road. He was telling me about it, and he said he retired. I said, cool. What are you doing with your time now? His answer was, I got 9 grandkids. I'm like, okay. And that was his entire answer. Like nothing else. What happens when you don't have 9 grandkids? What happens when you're child free and you're like, what am I going to do with the next 30 years of my life? You need that answer before you retire, and you need that answer before you even create a plan.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Please let us know your thoughts wherever comments are available, or email us at media@childfreewealth.com. To stay up to date, find and follow Childfree Wealth on social media. If you're interested in working with us, learn more by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time.